if there's any declaration of interest, you can declare it anytime. Heather, do you need to do a roll call or?
No, Tara will look after the attendance. Yeah, so that's fine.
Good, great, thank you. So we will move forward with our delegation, and is someone going to introduce them?
Yes, I can.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Council. Thank you for having us here. I our consultant for the Climate Change Action Plan, ICLEI Canada, is here with us today, and they will be providing us with a presentation on the Climate Change Action Plan and giving us an update on the plan. And today we have with us Caitlin Roger, Hiba Kareem, and Adler Gross with us, who will be presenting. So I'll give the floor to them. Thank you.
Hi everyone, thank you Hiba for the introduction. I'm not sure if Tara, are you going to post the slides up, or do I do that on my end?
I have it right here, so I can pull that up right now.
Okay, thank you. And will you be moving them, or should I?
Yeah, I can move them.
Okay. So hello everyone. Thank you for having us here today to speak about the Climate Change Action Plan. We will be reviewing the work that our consulting team has done to date, which includes a brief overview of both the corporate and community energy emissions inventory, I guess the business as usual projections to 2050, for the county, the current emissions targets as they've been proposed, and then we'll take a brief look at the strategies to meet the targets. So just a quick overview again of who we are. ICLEI is an international organization. We have the largest global network of local governments focused on sustainability and sustainable development. It's a network of 1,750 or over 1,750 local and regional governments in over 100 countries. We have sort of focus on sustainability policy with local governments in several strategic pathways, including low emissions, nature-based solutions, equity, resilience, and circular development. ICLEI Canada has 3 offices in Toronto, Montreal, and Victoria. And we work primarily with local governments in climate adaptation and climate mitigation through our Building Adaptive and Resilient Communities, or the BARC program, as well as the Partners for Climate Protection program. So the next slide. Again, with you today as myself, Caitlin Roger, I'm the Climate and Energy Planner with ICLEI Canada, and my colleagues Hiba Kareem and Adler Gross, both Climate Change Project Officers. As well, we have Ava Jackson and Megan Meany, who are not with us today, but they are strategic advisors on the plan, as well as Wood Consulting, which has done the energy mapping for the project. So I'm just going to spend the next few slides just to go over the work that we've done to date on the project. And then I'll jump into the GRACE inventories and targets. So beginning in December 2019 was the phase 1 of the project, which really laid the groundwork, establishing working groups, collecting necessary data, developing a communications and engagement plan, and the initial vision for the Climate Change Action Plan. Phase 2 and 3, we carried out engagement activities, including surveys, finalized draft of the corporate and community reduction targets, the community energy mapping work, Wood Consulting finalized, as well as looking on the vision and objectives and developing a list of potential strategies for the plan. So we're currently in phase 4 and 5 of the project. We'll be finalizing a list of strategies, quantifying potential energy emission and cost reductions for each of the strategies where applicable, and then finally writing the Climate Change Action Plan. Next slide. So as mentioned, the action plan includes both GRACE emissions for the corporate operations as well as the community at large, and that's for both the inventory and the strategies. So the sectors that we're looking at are energy and associated emissions from buildings and transportation, as well as the emissions released from the decomposition of solid waste and wastewater, and from agricultural activities, namely livestock, as well as strategies that look at land use, energy, and protecting waterways and shorelines. So Grey County is a member of the Partners for Climate Protection program. It's a joint initiative that's run by ourselves, ICLEI Canada, as well as the Federation for Canadian Municipalities. It's a network of over 400 Canadian municipalities from coast to coast to coast. You can see the map there, and it offers a lot of different resources to member municipalities, free training tools, network peer-to-peer learning, that sort of thing. So the Partners for Climate Protection program focuses on climate mitigation. It involves a 5-milestone framework. So the first part of the framework is to develop an emissions inventory and a forecast. The second part is, the second milestone is to set emission reduction targets that will ultimately be adopted by council. And the third is to develop the local action plan. And then 4 is to implement the plan, and 5 is monitoring and reporting on the results. So once our part of the project is sort of completed, we're looking at March of this year, the county will have achieved milestones 1 to 3 for both the corporate and community side. So just another quick overview, so we're all on the same page. So the project objectives have been to understand current and projected greenhouse gas emissions, develop a greenhouse gas reduction target, and to set goals, to identify actions to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and then prepare the climate change action plan. And again, that will meet the milestones 1 to 3 of the program. So the vision statement was created based on feedback from our team's presentation to council in March of last year. And during that session, council members were asked to describe the vision for a sustainable future in Grey County. From that feedback, along with the feedback from the working groups, a draft vision statement was created and presented both to the external and internal working groups, who gave further input on refining the vision statement. So this is the vision statement that we have developed. So the County of Grey is a clear and visible climate leader, taking actions to address climate change throughout municipal operations and in the community. By embracing energy conservation, innovative solutions, promoting awareness, and working with residents and businesses, the county is creating a more prosperous, sustainable, and healthier future in Grey that is equitable, accessible, and inclusive of urban and rural lifestyles. The vision statement doesn't include the targets, it doesn't include the goals, but it does paint a picture of what you would like the community to be in the future. And it's sort of a valuable resource that you can sort of refer back to when you're developing the plan and also implementing the plan. So now I'm going to go and do a sort of a brief overview of the community and energy emissions baseline. The baseline year was selected was 2018, and that was the last year with the most robust data set. The inventory includes Scope 1 emissions, which are emissions that are generated within the boundaries of the county. Scope 2 emissions are those emissions associated with the electricity grid. So you can see in this diagram here, it lays it out. Scope 3 emissions are those that are indirect. So if they're not occurring inside the boundary of the county, so if a resident takes a flight to another country, or if you buy a product that's been produced elsewhere, that's not included. So that's based on sort of global best practices in the community inventories currently. So what you'll see today is inventory based on the Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions. So
Caitlin, you're muted.
somehow I just did that. Sorry, I'll start that again. So the community inventory uses the global protocol for community scale emissions. It's really the global best practices currently in terms of community inventories. It includes both sectors and subsectors. So stationary energy is really the language used in these protocols. It's really referring to buildings. And so the subsectors that have been included here are residential, commercial, institutional, and industrial, and then fugitive emissions. So fugitive emissions are just those that are released during the production and distribution of natural gas. The second sector, we have transportation. So that includes private vehicle use. So that's both from residents and commercial uses are put together in private vehicle use. And then public transportation, buses, and then off-road vehicles. And then finally, there's waste. So that includes solid waste, which is the waste that's sent to landfill, as well as the decomposition of waste from wastewater. So this first graph looks at the community energy consumption by sector or by subsector. And what you can see is that the commercial institutional buildings, they're put together, and you look at the energy profile, they're put together because we're not able to access disaggregated data for those sectors. So those have been put together in this inventory, and they make up the largest energy consumer, I guess, for the county. So it's 37%. Next, you see private vehicles, and that's at 31%, and then residential buildings at 20%, and then a smaller proportion is for industrial buildings and off-road vehicles. There's it says 0, but it's really just less than 1% is for unmetered, and that's energy consumed that the utilities are tracking, but it's not associated with a particular sector, and it's generally quite small. So this graph is showing you the profile for emissions by subsector. It does include more sectors than what you saw in the previous graph because they're more, because not all of the emissions are associated with energy consumption. So what you will see on this, I guess on this graph, is that the agricultural sector makes up a large portion of the community's emissions at 44%. And this isn't, I guess this isn't unusual for a community that has a large agricultural sector. And what, I guess what this is from enteric fermentation and also manure management. So it's really attributed to livestock. Next, you'll see the private vehicles makes up the next, I guess, largest subsector in terms of emissions. It is slightly, I guess it's slightly larger than in the previous graph because the emissions intensity, so the greenhouse gas intensity of fuels is larger than that used to heat and power buildings. So when we look at the commercial institutional buildings and the residential buildings, you will see that that sort of has shifted as well from the previous graph. And the reason for that is because there are, I guess there's more natural gas being consumed in residential buildings. And again, that is because the natural gas has a higher sort of intensity of emissions than does the electricity grid in Toronto. So that's why you see sort of some shifts between the energy graph and then the emissions graph. Then we've broken this down based on the cost by subsector. And this is based on the energy consumption and then the energy cost that's associated, with that. So you'll see that the commercial institutional buildings are now making up a larger percentage, and that can be attributed to the higher cost of electricity over natural gas, which is why you look at the residential buildings and it is a smaller proportion. And that's also the same as for private vehicles. So the cost of diesel and gasoline are going to be higher, and that's why you see a shift between the costs and the energy consumption. So now go over the corporate inventory. So the corporate inventory is based on the Partners for Climate Protection protocol. It is itself based on the global best practices. It generally looks at 5 areas. So buildings and facilities, fleet vehicles, street lights and traffic signals, water, wastewater, and solid waste. So what's included in the inventory really comes down to what your corporation owns and what you have operational control over. So you might not see all these, and we don't see all these for Grey County, but we do include what you have operational control over in the inventory. So on this slide, we see both the energy consumption is on the left-hand side, and then the emissions are on the right-hand side. So for Grey, we have 3 areas in the protocol, in the inventory. So we have buildings, which make up 73% of the energy consumed, fleet at 21%, and then streetlights at 6%. When you look at the emission side of that, it's shifted slightly. So buildings are slightly less than fleet, again, because of the different emission intensity of the energy that's being consumed. And that's why you also see streetlights make up a smaller portion. And then again, we'll look at the cost, so the cost associated with the energy consumed, and you see that the cost of buildings makes up 75% of the corporation's energy consumption, and then 25% is for fleet, and then as well as equipment is included. And I think it's important just to come back when we're thinking about strategies. You can leave it on this slide, but when we're thinking about strategies, that the potential is not only in emissions reductions, but also when you look at the potential to reduce the cost of what you're spending on energy, you can also conserve and reduce the total amount of costs and use those dollars elsewhere. So I do apologize, this graph, I just caught the error just prior to this meeting, and there was a shift. The proportions are correct, but the labeling has actually been shifted from when we moved it into Excel into the slide deck. So just keep in mind, I will provide you with a corrected graph for this, because it is important for you guys to have the correct information. So I apologize that this isn't here, but I will have it provided following this meeting. So EMS is actually should be labeled housing. And housing does make up, so the percentages are correct. We've just had an issue with the labeling got shifted. So I apologize for that, but so we have housing is actually 82%, and EMS is going to be closer to 2%. So it's important to look at, to consider where the emissions are coming from, and the potential of where you could make the largest reductions. So since the housing makes up such a large portion of the emissions from the corporate building side, that's an opportunity to look at ways to reduce energy consumption and emissions from there could have a large impact. Again, I will provide the corrected graph, and I apologize if the labeling was not correct here. So this is showing corporate fleet. It includes the equipment as well. So that's under the off-road sections. But if you look at where the energy that's being consumed in fuels in the fleet, the largest two sectors or areas are gasoline light trucks and then diesel heavy trucks. And that makes up the largest proportion, and that would be the same for the total costs to the corporation as well. So I'm just going to go over the business as planned, or the business as usual projection. So that was going to look at, basically it's going to look at your inventory and then model that out to 2050, so you can have a sense of where things are heading to. So the first slide looks at the projected energy use to 2050 for the community. So if you look at the 2018, it's just what I've just shown you in the other graph. So that's really the inventory. It has the same subsector, or sectors and subsectors are involved. And the way that these are modeled out, it doesn't look like too much because there's not too much change. So that's not a bad thing. There are some communities where you're going to see sort of this exponential rise, and it's really tied to population and employment projections. And those are the population employment projections that are in Gray's own, or from Gray's own plans and studies. So we've used those projections to laid them on what the expected growth would be. But what we also do is we look at sort of regional trends in fuel efficiencies or retrofits and things becoming more efficient. So we apply several different metrics to model out what you could expect in the future. So for Gray, we see a bit of a balance because there's not a huge projection for population growth. So you see it's pretty much 2018 and 2050 don't have too much change. So this graph is basically the same thing, but we're now looking at emissions. So the big difference here is you're going to also, we'll have agriculture on as well included. And again, the business as planned or business as usual doesn't really see like too much of a large difference to 2050, which is a good thing, but it also is not, it's not a great thing, because if you look at the graph too, we have two lines on the graph. So one of them is for the IPCC, which is the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. They have provided sort of a reduction target that we'd need to meet globally in order to prevent global warming from rising more than 1.5 degrees Celsius. So it's within the safe threshold. So we also have the other line on the graph is for the federal target. So we've just taken those targets and applied them to Gray. So you could just get a sense of where you'd need to be at 2050 in order to meet those larger sort of regional and international or global targets. So although there's not a huge, yeah.
Sorry, can we just go back one slide just for a sec? It's Kim. With the private vehicles piece here and that energy consumption really remaining unchanged, you don't foresee an impact as technology changes, as EVs, et cetera, become, or hydrogen or whatever we're going to use to power cars becomes mandated? You don't see that changing the energy consumption?
Yeah, so there's two things to say is that there are fuel efficiency standards that are applied in the back end of this, and EV adoption applied in the back end of this. It's offset by the population growth in this case.
Oh, sad.
So there is. Okay. So there's the other thing too is that the federal government has a goal of having 100% of EVs being sold, 100% of vehicles being EVs sold by 2040. So it's not 100% of vehicles, but the 100% of vehicles being sold by 2040. It's a federal goal. So it's as of right now, it's not mandated. So we've put more conservative values into the back end of this model, because it is also important for communities to help the federal government get to that goal. And so I don't want to put something that's overly ambitious here. Then we don't have a responsibility also to act locally.
Of course. Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. You can go to the next slide. So this is really tied, so this looks at the cost projections to 2050 for the community. So it's tied to the energy that we're anticipating, and it's using the Canada Energy Regulator's projections for what cost could be. So the Canada Energy Regulator has a high cost and a low cost, and that's what you see here. So this is a potential for an increase or potential for remaining about the same. But I think what's important to remember when we're looking at the costs is that much of those costs are going to be leaving the county. So I think it's upwards of 80% or more are dollars that are leaving the community. So there's an opportunity, if we're looking at sort of conservation and reducing our energy consumption, to keep energy dollars into the community, and to ensure that the costs of energy, the cost that's being spent on energy, isn't going to be increasing, because you don't want that. Okay, so this is basically, I'm just going to show you the same 3 slides, but it's going to be the corporate side. So again, the corporate side is really made up by buildings and by fleet. And again, you're going to see slightly different, because of the energy profile of the corporate versus the community. You're going to see slightly different sort of results, but generally for gray, it's not too different to 2050. And then here are the emissions. And again, it's very similar to what you're seeing in terms of the energy consumption. Here we haven't applied, the targets, because those were, more community targets. But again, you're not seeing, the big reduction that you would want in order for Gray to be sort of showing leadership in the emissions reductions from the corporate side. And again, it looks very similar. It's the same, it's really the same thing. It's just applied for the corporate side. So you could have, an increase right now. You're looking, a potential of having it at a low cost scenario. There's not too much change. But if you're, dealing with the high cost scenario, then having, those strategies in place in order to reduce costs are going to protect those dollars, to keep them in the corporation for other items. Okay, now I'm just gonna move on and do a bit of a background on setting reduction targets. So I'll just read this slide out just to give I guess a sense and overview of the sort of basic tenets of setting a reduction target. So targets should be specific to the corporate operations and the community at large, or both. Targets should be ambitious, recognizing the urgency of climate change and the need to act to avoid the most severe impacts and protect the long-term interests of communities. Targets should be meaningful, connected to the local context, including local circumstances, values, and priorities. Targets should be measurable, containing a baseline year, a target year, and a % reduction. And then targets must also be adopted by council resolution in order to meet the Partners for Climate Protection milestone 2. So here's just a look at what other communities have set. So these are targets that have been adopted by council resolution in other communities in Ontario. I'll go over them so you get a sense of what others are doing. So in Kawartha Lakes, they have a corporate target 20% below 2015 by 2030. Peterborough has a corporate target of 26% below 2011 by 2031, and a community target of 31% below 2011 by 2032. So it's not necessarily has to be the same for corporate and community. Blue Mountains doesn't have a corporate target. They do have several community targets. So 6% below 2005 by 2016, 30% below 2005 by 2025, 80% below 2005 by 2050. So you see an increasing level of ambition over time with the Blue Mountain community target. For Oxford County, they've stipulated a 69% below 2015 by 2050 and a 47% below 2016 by 2050 for the community. You do often see, I think Peterborough is sort of an odd one there because you often do see higher corporate targets than community targets, and that's simply because a corporation would have more operational control than they would with the community. And then Oxford County also has a sub-target of being 100% renewable by 2050. So they've added an extra piece of it as well. The township of Huron-Kinloss is 24% below 2016 by 2036, and then they have the same target by for the community. And again, I've listed out the federal target and the IPCC target below. I know this is a lot of numbers, I apologize. I just want to give you a sense of, they really are sort of tailored to your community, as well as, keeping in mind what sort of, the urgency of climate change and also what's reasonable and acceptable locally. So federal target, you saw this federal target and the IPCC target on the graphs before, and then those were just applied to the context of gray, but the federal target is for 30% below 2005 by 2030, 90% below 2005 by 2050. The IPCC target 45% by 2030, and then the 95, or it should be actually 95 below 2010 by 2050. So there's a lot going on. There's a lot of numbers. I know it's overwhelming, but I did want to just give you a sense of, there is a lot of difference, and you can set targets that are appropriate for your community. So there are two ways to establish targets, a top-down approach and a bottom-up approach. So the top-down approach is really establishing the target first and then trying to find a way to meet the target. So this approach, it does include a bit of uncertainty, but it can lead to more ambitious targets. The bottom-up approach would start by identifying actions first and assessing the potential of emissions reductions that could be enabled through those actions. So it allows for more certainty, but it can also lead to, it could perhaps lead to less ambitious targets. So the draft targets shown here from a top-down approach. It's been developed with the engagement with the working groups, where participants were asked to describe, levels of ambition and what, and the need for being realistic with what can be achieved. So this is really based on the feedback and consideration of the sort of emissions profile that you've all saw before for Grey County. But anyway, these are the targets that are being proposed. So for the corporate side, 20% below 2018, which is our inventory year, by 2030, and then 60% below 2018 by 2050. The community side, it's going to be slightly lower for reasons I've already mentioned, that sometimes there are differences in what what we can achieve through sort of operational control with the corporation versus the community. In this case, they're slightly lower, so it'd be 15% below 2018 by 2030, and then 50% below 2018 by 2050. So keep in mind that we will be modeling out the potential reduction for each of the strategies where it's applicable, and that will be available to you at the next meeting. So I'll pass it over now to my colleague Adler Gross, who's going to go over to sort of provide you with a summary of the strategies that are being proposed, and then I guess we can stop that and take questions.
Great, thank you, Caitlin. And nice to be here with you everyone today. So yeah, I'm just going to be giving a high-level overview of the draft strategies for the community we've developed. You can see these 7 focus areas here. I'm only going to be talking about the first 6, as the protection of waterways and shorelines is being developed internally currently. So next slide, please. So in the first area here, buildings, the key objective here is really to improve the energy efficiency of buildings through energy efficiency retrofitting and conservation, so behavioral measures and increasing education and awareness of residents and businesses of the actions they can take, as well as encouraging new developments to be above building code and moving towards ever higher energy efficiency standards. And the energy efficiency education awareness is also a very large component of this, as well as working with industry to develop the types of energy management programs they can be implementing there as well. And of course, there are a lot of grants and resources already available that can be communicated to residents as well. We go to the next slide, please. So in the transportation sector, we're trying to achieve, of course, an increase in low carbon vehicles, as well as reducing vehicle demand through increasing active transportation options. We do have a focus primarily on electric vehicles, but with the new federal hydrogen strategy that just came out in December, there should be more opportunities for hydrogen vehicles coming out in the future. So that's something we'll want to take a look at as well. And in terms of addressing the rural vehicle demand, it's becoming more popular to develop these on-demand services. So we're going to be looking at expanding the existing rural transportation options in Grey County, as well as new options such as rural taxi buses or on-demand bus services and rideshare programs and things of that nature. In terms of modal shift, that's encouraging more cycling, trail connectivity, ensuring the streets are safe for cyclists, and there are a lot of crossover benefits there as well by increasing tourism and cycling tourism opportunities in the county as well. Yeah, thank you. For waste, this is a very collaborative sector because it's primarily going to be working with the other lower tier municipalities, as they each have their own waste management system. So looking at how waste diversion can be expanded and harmonized across the county. The key objective here is to divert waste from landfill, of course, particularly with a focus on organics, as this is the primary contributor to methane emissions. But of course, we want to overall move towards a circular economy. So looking at things like more reuse it and rebuild it centers becoming more popular, as this allows the sale of items to generate proceeds for community services, as well as educating on and building on already existing backyard composting programs and looking to further those. And of course, there's a lot of awareness and education that can be going on as well on an individual level.
Adler?
Yes.
Can I ask, do you see that right to repair kind of legislation coming to this jurisdiction, or?
I wouldn't be able to comment on that right now,
Okay.
unfortunately, but yeah, I could definitely look into how that might be impacting
Okay.
these initiatives for sure. Yeah, thank you for bringing that up. Yeah, so agriculture will be a very large component of the strategy, and the county will take more of a facilitative role in this by supporting the agriculture community and helping to develop capacity building networks and resources that can be used. This can include things like making them aware of the different types of environmental farm plans and grants and programs that are available at various levels of government. as well as encouraging more demonstration projects and research partnerships with universities to explore sustainable farming, regenerative farming practices, as well as looking at carbon sequestration opportunities. And there's quite a bit of synergy here between the waste sector as well. There's opportunity to produce biogas from manure as well as municipal solid waste. Of course, there'll be a lot of partnerships with the conservation authorities as well in terms of looking at how to reduce runoff and eutrophication and protection of the wetlands as well. So land use is all about continuing to promote mixed use compact development in order to protect natural environmental resources and integrate smart growth planning. And this also ties into reducing vehicle demand by encouraging active transportation by developing these complete communities where it's applicable. I mean, it's not always going to be appropriate to develop mixed use in a largely rural municipality, but where it is possible, it should certainly be encouraged. And there's also a lot of strategies here around reforestation, so developing urban forestation plans, encouraging naturalization of private properties, as well as looking at tree planting programs as well. There's various examples of that. And lastly will be the energy sector. This is primarily focusing on encouraging solar PV, and that's because the current policy landscape in Ontario, there is really only net metering is available right now to encourage renewable energy adoption, and solar PV kind of fits best into that model. But of course, we want to keep the option open in the future for other types of renewable energy, such as wind and biomass and things like that. So a component of this is also ensuring that the regulations and zoning bylaws and permitting processes are aligned with that and would encourage that type of thing when it wouldn't present any barriers should renewable energy want to be pursued in the future. So you can see, thank you for your attention, and you can see our contact information here. And at this point, I think we want to open up the floor to any questions you might have.
Okay, thank you very much for the presentation. Very informative. I'll turn it over to our committee. Are there questions from anyone? Warden Hicks, please go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We just heard, I just heard the presenter talking about the federal government's hydrogen policy. I don't know if I'm saying that correctly. I'm not aware of this. Could you give me a little bit of background about what that is?
Yeah, it was actually just released in December 16th. I haven't had the opportunity to review it completely in depth yet, but it is outlining the federal government's strategy to encourage more commercialization of hydrogen vehicles and develop partnerships. And it sounds like there's going to be some funding released as well. It's very recent, so not too much information about it as yet, but we'll see how that develops in the coming months.
So pardon my ignorance, but I didn't even know that hydrogen vehicles were an option. My understanding is that hydrogen tends to go boom. So people are fearful of hydrogen. Is that really a thing?
Yeah. There's Toyota has a hydrogen vehicle available for sale. It's not as common as electric vehicles, simply because it hasn't been invested as much as the EV, and there are a lot of problems around that need to be figured out around that, particularly around the storage and transportation of it. It's a bit more expensive than EVs to set up that infrastructure. So it's why it hasn't quite been, hasn't reached commercialization yet.
Thank you.
Yep.
Any further questions? Councillor McQueen?
Yeah, just following up with the warden. I know last year down at the automotive car show in Toronto, they were talking about hydrogen, and the biggest problem right now on hydrogen is the infrastructure of filling. But I think other countries are, is it Japan or other areas, are really fast tracking hydrogen. I know in BC, they had, for a few years, their buses were being, I think a company called Ballard were sort of doing a test project or whatever, or they were certainly using all their buses through, I think, the city of Vancouver and that. The other comment I would like to make is energy in itself, and certainly we live in the northern part of North America, which basically 6 months of the year we've got to keep warm, it seems like. But then again, you live into further southern climates, you certainly have to keep cool. Certainly something that I've always been an advocate on is certainly, is we know we have two elements that affect our homes, is wind and solar, not only from the issue of energy, but also if you site your home in a very high spot, the wind will cool your house off. And similar to siting your home or building your home with windows located to have, natural solar, radiation coming through into your house. And then certainly with, at one time, used to always talk about how a home with a porch around, well, in the wintertime, the sun is low in the southern sky, where the sun will radiate into your home, where later on into the summer long, the summer is much higher, and the porches certainly keep a lot of that radiation coming into your house. So siting and certainly home construction, it's not something new, but I think in a big part that is something that I think could make a big difference is, and I say about wind and taking the cooling your home off in the wintertime, certainly trees, you talk about planting trees, but planting trees to create windbreaks certainly help you lose or consume or preserve some of that energy loss that you do in your homes. And I don't know if if there are some more work or best practices. I think those are very simple things that can make a big difference in the sense of how we move into construction in the future. And, just by, being aware of all those, I guess, elements that affect us as far as nature goes, is just, developing maybe not so prominent in subdivision, but more of more rural, but still there is a lot I think can be still developed in ways of building and moving forward in energy efficiencies, even more so than maybe what we're thinking of today. You look at a building that's 3 stories high, for example, is going to catch more elements of heat or wind. But if you keep more low buildings, you have a tendency to keep more of the earth heat and coolness to work to your advantage as well. So just throwing that out there into something that I don't know if our guests here today have the ability or have tapped into that other aspect of new design and building. But I just think that's something that we should certainly keep our minds on, in the sense, because it's about energy use that does have a big effect on emissions, and how can we curb that energy use, or how can we capitalize on the solar and wind that we do have as a natural aspect of our homes, and how we can capture that. Just a comment.
If I
Kim,
can,
go ahead, please.
yeah, add a couple of things. Certainly to Mayor McQueen's point, I think there's some potential, work that we can all do with our local building departments and building officials, as well as the Ministry of Municipal Affairs, because one of the comments that I've heard is that for people who are looking to move to be more innovative in things like passive solar, or using new materials that might offer greater thermal mass and that sort of thing, sometimes it's difficult for them to get that kind of different construction approved, if you will. It slows things down and can be more expensive. The other point that I wanted to raise was just back to the hydrogen piece. And I don't know if folks are familiar, but back in November, Bruce Power announced their Clean Energy Frontier program that is over Bruce, Grey, and Huron counties. There's a hydrogen portion to that as well. And so I think they're looking at net zero by 2050 for this region. So there may be some opportunities for us to build on or leverage the work that the Nuclear Innovation Institute is doing as well.
Thank you. Are there any comments from our presenters on what's just been said? Seeing none, are there questions? Adler, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to follow up on Paul's comment about that. So those types of things are what we would typically include in the under the like a green development standard, like a voluntary sustainability checklist, looking at exterior design elements that developers should take into account when designing a building. Yeah, that was it.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other questions from the rest of committee? Okay, I do have one. Adler, it's for you. When you were speaking about buildings, you mentioned grants available for residential. Is that something that's planned to kind of build into the program so that when we present it, we let people know exactly what those grants are and how they can go about applying for them?
Yeah, exactly. That would go into a kind of like education awareness campaign. You know, it could be a simple landing page on the municipal website that directs residents to the available opportunities. I've seen this before in other municipalities. Enbridge's has a variety of grants and offers unavailable, for example, as well as the IESO. So yeah, that would typically be the approach there.
Okay, excellent. Because I think if we're going to get buy-in from the residential side, we're going to need to be very clear on the opportunities available for them as well. So if there are no other comments or questions, Warden Hicks, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My question is really around the proposed, gray targets. And I guess I don't know much about this, so I'm really looking to educate myself. Are those targets easily reached? Is it an ambitious target, or is it something that we reasonably can reach, given the presentation that I saw about the areas for improvement? So are those easily reached targets? And if they are easily reached, would we then be subject to criticism about, well, nice target, but it's not all that ambitious? So in other words, are we hitting that sort of line where we can reasonably reach our targets but not be criticized for not doing sort of enough?
I appreciate the question. I would say that the targets that we've listed out are not the most, they're not the highest end of ambition. A lot of communities are looking towards net zero right now, but many communities are looking at 10%, 15% reduction. So saying a 50 or 60% is an ambitious target, it's not going to be easily reached. We do have, I guess, when you see we just gave a high-level summary of the strategies that they've been proposed right now. When you do see the strategies again, you'll see that there's other considerations that go into each of those and what the scope of each of those strategies would look like. And then with that would be also the potential reduction in emissions and in energy, and also in potential cost savings as well associated with each one of those strategies. So when you do look at that accumulated, we'll see what we can do with where we can get. So I talked about a top-down approach and a bottom-up approach. So when we do look at those strategies and accumulate what the total reduction would be, we'll have a very a much better sense of what's achievable. But certainly those are ambitious targets, and they're not easily achievable. There would still be work to do to get there.
And certainly, I'm hearing you say not the most ambitious, also not sort of the lowest either. Not just paying lip service to this thing.
Yes. Yes, and I think that was what was came back from the feedback we received from the working groups. In terms of level of ambition, I think that what we got, the sense that we got from everyone was that they were looking to have a high level ambition, but they also was important to set targets that were reasonable and achievable and realistic. So that's why we kind of settled on sort of a higher end target, but one that wasn't, you know, the highest, wasn't a net zero target.
Thank you.
Excellent. And I have one further question as well. Not seeing your presentation slide deck in our agenda for today, I'm wondering if that will be shared on the website for all of us to refer to?
Yes, I can make sure that's posted to the website.
Madam Chair, it is, I've been following the slide deck available on the county's website.
It should, I'm just going to check and see. It should have been under the agenda documents, but
It was, yes.
Okay, perfect.
Okay. And I don't have that pulled up in front of me right now. I just have the agenda in front of me. So, okay,
Yeah,
thank you for
no
pointing
problem.
that out.
It is there though. Yeah.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. Okay, well, thank you very much for the presentation. Very good information for us. So we will then move on to reports now.
Yep, and I'm happy to take this one. So much of the reports that are provided in the agenda today were really provided to support some of the conversation and ideas and data that was going to be presented by ICLEI today. So the Grey County Baseline and Business as Usual Energy and Emissions report really provided a more in-depth look into some of the data that was broadly presented today. So it lays out how what the data is, what that data means, and how ICLEI had come to their findings. The draft climate change action plan, vision statement, goals and targets. Again, Caitlin and Adler had touched on this. So this is the draft vision statement that we had created in collaboration with County Council, input from the internal, external working groups. And the goals and targets were also informed by those groups as well. So this is just a document that we created that puts all of that together, that's available for you to review. The agricultural survey results is a survey that we completed last year earlier this summer. In August, and we presented. This was done to complement the general survey that we had completed, and this survey was more focusing on the agricultural community. We wanted to understand, recognizing that they are a huge sector within Grey County. We recognize that it's important to get more targeted feedback and to understand how Grey County can support the ag community. So we went out and we released a survey asking them ways in which we can support them. And so the survey results are available, and this is a report that was just created to kind of highlight the main findings of that report. I won't go into too much details about the specific findings and the specific data, but if anybody has any questions on kind of what was presented in that report, I'm happy to make any comments or clarify anything in that report. Part of our desire for this meeting today was to really get a better sense of a kind of from our council on kind of what their thoughts are around the vision statement that we presented, the goals and the targets that we're proposing, and to get a real understanding of and have some discussion on whether it aligns with the Grey County strategic vision and the municipal strategic vision. Are we heading in the right path? Are we achieving what we had set out in those documents? So that's one of the first questions I was wanting to pose to our members here today, to really get a sense of what they think. Some of what we've stated in our vision statement, does it align with what we're hoping to accomplish at the county and municipal level?
Are there any comments from committee regarding this? To give us some feedback? Councillor McQueen?
Yeah, I'm looking at the survey with the agricultural side, and we do have an agricultural advisory committee set up now in the county as well. I think it would be good if from the cross reference to maybe sort of have that as one of the topics at one of your next meetings, just to sort of, you know, awareness and some of these, and probably there are maybe some members that sit on that or from the agricultural side that maybe did the survey with regards to the agricultural. But I think it's very important that you keep the conversation going, like in all sectors. And again, just on that side, we do have that agriculture advisory there. So I think it would be good to, you know, if you were maybe to be part of that at some time on an agenda. I think it's always good to keep that conversation going.
Yeah, I think the Agricultural Advisory Committee is going to be an important asset to this plan. We did happen to present the ag survey results to that committee in their first meeting, and we did get some good feedback from them. So they are aware of the survey and what was presented in the survey.
Okay, well, thanks. You're thinking ahead of me then. Thank you.
Any further comments or questions? Warden Hicks?
Madam Chair, what does it mean when we say that we are a clear and visible climate leader?
So
what are we trying to get at there?
For sure. And I think our thought was around this was really, you know, it started with our corporate section of our plan to really lead by example. So we wanted to make sure that any policies or any targets that we're setting, we're holding ourselves accountable first, really making it a point to make our corporate assets more sustainable and really leading by example. And I think broadly the vision statement is that over time we will become a leader within the climate change realm, and really for rural communities to look at us as an example of potential ways of learning and how we've accomplished some of our goals hopefully in the future. So it really started with our corporate section, taking charge of our corporate assets, making sure that we as a corporation are becoming leaders and leading by example, and then hopefully Gray and within our community we can be partners and examples for our neighboring rural municipalities.
And Madam Chair, if I may continue, which of these initiatives that we or sort of areas that we plan to take really goes into the area of innovation? How can we say that we're innovative?
So we're hoping to partner with businesses and large organizations within the county, and so for example working with Enbridge or Bruce Power to really capitalize on some of the programs that they have or technologies that they're working on. It's also to make sure that we are bringing in technologies that are being created in the private sector and making sure that those are available to our residents, they're aware, and that the jobs that are potentially created from those innovations or those advancements are also available to our residents. So it's really working with our corporate, with corporations, the private sector, with companies within Gray to really help them recognize the importance of climate change, the importance of innovation, and really help bring some of that change that's happening within the private sector to our community.
So really, it's through collaboration that we are going to exploit existing innovations. Not that we are necessarily going to be the innovative ones, but we're going to look for those innovations that exist and collaborate with people who are doing innovative things.
That is a priority, yes.
okay, thank you. Are there, Councillor McQueen, go ahead.
So just to continue on this, and I know that I got a couple points I'd like to make, and it's, I think we're all being called that we need to do something. I think it's out there that we have to do a change, and I think that's why we have a committee here and why we're here today. So a couple things just to throw out there. I think, you know, you gotta, you know, what's the saying goes, you gotta talk the talk, the walk, however you want to say that, right? So we gotta start making some changes. So I know from a Grey Highlands perspective, we also have a climate change committee that's made up, and I think that would be maybe one takeaway is we're, Grey County is made up of 9 municipalities. Can we inspire our local councils to take a look at what we can do? Number two, I look at, moving forward, it's about education and how do we educate the 95,000 or thereabouts people in Grey County, and from educating and say, what have you done or what can you do? And having whether it's a flyer or a publication or something to say, these are some small things that you can do that will make a small difference, but collectively we make a big difference. And maybe we start to address some of those targets. And I just, it may be very simple things that we can do in the start, but we start thinking about it. And that's, I think the key thing is just our everyday lives. What can we make different? What can we do differently that will just even make that 1% difference? But you add up all the 1% collectively, and those awards we're talking about collectively, how can we, it's going to take all of us to really make a difference, from a municipal to a county to a province to a country to the world. And I think this is going to be the huge change that we have, and there's many facets of what that means and how we're going to get there. But but a lot of it is starting in communication and education, and just, it's not like you're trying to ram something down somebody's throat, but in a sense of it's changing the channel. And I think that's why us as elected officials, I think, are at that point where we need to the message out there and start to talk about it. And I know from younger generations, they're talking about it. It just as a sector, from all aspects of everything we do and all aspects of day-to-day life and commercial and industrial businesses and everything, it's almost like having a strategic plan, and your bottom, at the end of your letterhead or your page or your website, it has that small statement that we're going to make a difference, or however, it's just a reminder. And we do that with strat plans and in our organization, and certainly probably in small business too. It's just that reminder of, we're here to make a difference. And, just as a comment, we've seen a big change in our emissions with a lot less flying of planes. It's just because of, the COVID-19. I think if you ever look at anything positive of 2020 and COVID-19 is we definitely have less emissions in our atmosphere because of less planes. I forget how many planes a day in an average day would fly. And are we doing something along that industry? I mean, it's out of our hands. That's a different industry that we can't control, but it's funny how that's a big part. And it's the energy that's consumed that does emit a lot of the emissions, that does cause, the carbon buildup and everything else along there. But I'm not going to talk any more about that. But anyway, just some comments about how we can maybe do. It's like that saying back, I think Ontario Hydro had a long, long time ago. If we each save a little, we all save a lot. If we each do something, we can do a lot. And that's where I'll leave it at that, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Just a question. I know in Georgian Bluffs, we are just getting started with a climate action group, and we're having our third meeting tomorrow, and I think you're speaking to us tomorrow, which thank you very much. Do we know how many of the 9 municipalities within the county have a plan in place or are working on getting one in place that could be working together with the county at this time?
Yeah, I don't think any of our municipalities have a formal plan. I think the municipality or the town of Blue Mountains had created a sustainability plan that was adopted, but right now I think they're in the process of writing a new sustainability plan. But from my work with all of the municipalities, it's been clear that this has become a priority for many municipalities. There has been work done by a lot of members, committee groups, or groups within the community that have created sustainable groups or that have advocated to councils, local councils, for more work to be done here. So I think we are seeing a growth of community groups in all of our municipalities. We're seeing council committees being created as part of this work, and I think there's a lot of interest and growing. So what our message has been is that we want to support all of that work. We're here as a resource. If anybody, I know your municipality such as Georgian Bluffs is now looking to create a plan, so we want to provide as many resources to them and yourself as we can. So we are here. If anybody who'd like to start on that process, we'd like to provide all the resources that we can. So I think from just abroad, I wouldn't be able to tell you who has plans and who has committees right off the top of my head, but from my understanding, I think almost every municipality in Grey has started some work or some level of work on climate change.
If I can just add to Hiba's point, Ontario Reg 58817, which is your asset management planning for municipal infrastructure reg, requires every municipality to have a strategic asset management policy. And then that policy, the content of that policy is outlined in the regulation. But one of the pieces that it has to include is mitigation approaches to climate change, such as greenhouse gas emission reduction goals and targets, disaster planning, that sort of thing. So the actions that may be required to address vulnerabilities that may be caused by climate change to the municipality's infrastructure assets is what the reg requires. So that is part of your asset management plan, and I believe that that's a requirement by July of 2021. Although we are seeing things kind of shift a little bit with COVID, but I think that's the target that we have in front of us.
Excellent, thank you. Hiba, you have 3 questions, A, B, and C here. Are you looking to have answers to those from the committee today, or was this just food for thought?
A bit of both. We were hoping that these questions would help guide some of the, while you were reading the reports, but also we are looking to get some feedback on these questions because we want to integrate the comments from this committee into our draft plan and into our strategies. So at our next meeting, I will be presenting our strategies more in depth and providing an overview of both the corporate and community strategies and what we've developed so far. And so you will have that information available to you at the next meeting, but we are hoping that you can answer these questions today and help us inform some of that work as well. So
okay.
if you have any comments today that you can provide us, that would be great. Or if you'd like to provide them in written form, that's also, that would be also appreciated.
Okay.
I want to, can I
go ahead?
just, yeah, if I could just build on the comments that Mayor McQueen was making about making this real for people. You know, like it talks in the baseline and businesses planned results project, you know, it speaks to things like the average person in Grey used 30 gigajoules of gasoline and diesel and spent this much money on fuel. Can we turn these targets into, or give examples of what it would take to achieve the targets as they've been laid out based on activities that people can see themselves in? If you took the insulation level of your house from here to there, or you, you know, upgraded windows in an older property from single to double pane, like, is it possible that we could give real or get real examples of activities and what that translates to? So, you know, and back to where Warden Hicks was saying, you know, are the targets that we've laid out, are they achievable? Are they a huge stretch? And that, I think it's hard to know that when we can't translate the activities into you know, actions that a business or a person, a family could undertake.
If I can, I might defer to Caitlin or Adler for this one.
I would say in terms of what we will provide to you will be not so much like what an individual action would be, but what collectively what would happen. So for example, and just off the top of my head, I'm thinking of a residential retrofit program.
Mm-hmm.
So what we will present to you is the residential retrofit would say it's a deep energy retrofit. We're looking at gains of a 40% increase in energy efficiency per household.
Mm-hmm.
So what we would present to you is to say, well, if we were able to get that energy efficiency, we achieve that through the program, then how many houses are we able to do in the program? And then collectively, what would that mean for Gray? So it's, we would be able, I mean, a little bit, we are able to like sort of base our model on, and I know this is maybe not the answer you're looking for.
No, it's we have to start somewhere, Caitlin. So I mean, you're not, so we know there's a lot of new housing being built right now. That housing is built to a particular standard right now. So the impact of continuing, you've incorporated a growth model into this. So if we continue to build the new houses that are in your growth model to the standard that they're being built today, that has an impact. If if the new housing stock was built to a different standard, if we said that, you know, we want R20 in the walls instead of R10 or something, and I'm pulling that number out of my hat, what would that do? As well, we've got a huge amount of old housing stock in Grey County, tons of it. What would it be like if we started at the other end of things and said, these are our quote unquote worst offenders? And if we did something with those, if we had a program to help those homeowners, that would make such a huge difference to the bottom line. You know what I mean? Like, it's just, I don't know if anybody's done that modeling.
Yeah, actually, I mean, it's a really good point, and we do stipulate in our strategies that we've outlined. When you know, if you look deeper, I mean, we just give you a high overview today, but you'll see that we've actually stipulated targeting the sort of worst offenders. So we don't call them that because actually
shaming people is not a good strategy.
No, and it's because, well, I mean, we don't look at it like that. We look at them as the area with the
biggest opportunity,
right? So we do stipulate having the older homes targeted first, and if you know, through a residential retrofit program, because you do have the largest gains in those areas. And then in terms of new buildings, you know, implementing sort of a green new standard, we'll also see that those, you know, that reduction in the overall, you know, when I showed you those graphs, I'll again, you know, have those graphs available for you, and you'll see the reductions accumulated for, say, all of those things together. So with the, you know, with the new buildings, yeah, they're increasing in that graph. So yes, the graphs aren't looking too different, but there's a lot on the back end that's shifting them. And you will see that once you start applying the reductions, you'll see that going down, and that's part of it.
Okay, thank you.
I do want to add, all of our community strategies have an education component to them. So I think, Kim, what you're speaking to, there might be an opportunity in that realm to provide some of that context and some of that examples, and make those numbers a little bit more relatable when we're reaching out and doing an education session or a campaign with members of our community. We can provide some of that more context.
Yeah, that'd be good. Thanks.
Councillor McQueen, you had a question?
Well, it's sort of a question in a sense of putting it back to the community, but it's I think it's a bigger point. I just want to make a comment that the biggest change in energy consumption was for everybody moving to LED lighting. I mean, that made a huge change in energy savings, not only from the residential side, but certainly from the commercial industrial side. Look at, I know we as a municipality and a number of other municipalities switched a lot of their street lighting to LED, and I think the payback was like 5 or 6 years. So what you're paying in hydro and their 20-year lights. So everybody experienced that. but I've had this conversation and, with a few people, and I think there's a poll out there that is it by 2030 that, or maybe less, every household, one of their vehicles will be electric vehicle. That's sort of what they're talking about. But then you have that curve that goes the other way where you're starting to put more demands on electricity. You do need to talk about how we're going to produce this electricity. If we're moving things away from, the combustion engine and the coal and oil and moving toward cleaner energy, cleaner uses of energy, we've got to keep up the pace on that part because our populations are still continuing to grow and everything else. So we got to make sure that we don't all of a sudden, and this is from a bigger perspective in the sense of our, the industry and federal, provincial governments and that. I mean, all of a sudden somebody said, "Oh, we're going to build a new nuclear site in your backyard." Everybody goes, "Oh, I don't want that." But you know what I mean? We have to be, it has to go in step as we change what we're doing. We got to make sure we're thinking about all the things that we're changing to keep up the pace to where we think or want to go. And, certainly there's always bumps in the road as you go along, but, if everybody, as some industry leaders have said, or I've heard that if we all bought an electric car tomorrow, we'd have a hard time providing the charging capability of all those vehicles just because of all of a sudden that big shift. So, that's something that, we have to look at. And just as a last comment, I always looked at, opportunities, and it may still come that each of our homes can still be little charging centers, whether it's solar roofs or little windmills, because in my mind, the electrical car, similar to the cordless drill, is a source of storing energy. And that's the issue with renewables, is how do you store the energy when the wind blows and the sun shines, but when it's not, it doesn't generate, but you still need to store that energy to use it when it doesn't do that. So I think there's a lot of things that need to be continued to, and it goes back to that little parts that make a big part. And it just, from the University of Guelph or from other areas that on the technology side and into the investment side. I mean, that's so important from our governments also, is to be looking at new ways of doing this stuff. And that's also, we got to make sure that we are proactively after our upper tier, lower tier, or upper tier, higher tier, or provincial or federal governments, to make sure they are investing in in innovative ways, new ways, in science and all that kind of stuff, continuing to look at, that technology, because it's continuing to change as we go along. So I wasn't trying to stand on a box and spout out, but it's things that I've heard, and just something it has to go in tandem with as we make those changes. Things have to sort of go parallels as we move along. So I don't know if our presenters have any comments there. I know the newer generations, I know there's just so many exciting things that are coming along too, I think, that we have to embrace. And I don't know, if there's any thoughts there from our presenters?
I can provide some comments there. Yeah, I think you're really, really tapping into like what's happening. You have your pulse on the new, the cutting edge, really, like just with in Ontario alone, there's like Electra Powerhouse project piloted that type of system you're talking about, where you have every house has a solar panel and a battery and an electric car, and they're all working together. And then the local distribution company is kind of this emerging role as an energy manager rather than just a distributor of electricity. There's a lot of kinks that are being worked out in the area. Ottawa Hydro is also working on a kind of virtual net metering program as well, where you kind of aggregate all the individual houses at the individual level, and it becomes its own power plant, really. Virtual power plants is what they're called. So there's definitely a lot of cutting edge stuff happening in here. But then you start getting into the kinks of, well, of privacy issues, and how do individuals feel about having a local distribution company have control over their battery or their electric car, when is it charging, everyone charging at night, people charging at different times. So there's, yeah, that's, I mean, not to go down a rabbit hole here, but
I'm just going to add to that and just point out that it's, I mean, in a larger picture, it's also important to consider energy equity and energy poverty too as part of the pictures, because as there's more demand, of course, we're going to see, higher prices. So it's also a part of the reason we're looking at renewable energy in these strategies, and also reducing energy consumption, because you're also protecting your your energy security in the community, and also for the lower income individuals in the community as well, who are going to more impacted by increasing energy prices.
Excellent, good comments. So we're back to the questions to consider. Does anyone have a response to those questions today, or do you want to each individual get back to Hiba with some comments by email later? I see Councillor Woodbury nodding his head. Councillor Hutchison, Councillor Desai, do you have any comments to make here?
No comment from me.
Thank you. Okay.
Not at this time, thank you.
Thank you. Hiba, does that work for you if we all send back? And I see the warden has a comment. Go ahead.
So I'm still struggling a little bit with the targets, and particularly on the community side, because I think Caitlin mentioned quite rightly the issue of control. We can have more control over the corporate target than we do over community. And it seems to me, how exactly, I mean, if we've got an upper tier working on this target of 15%, we obviously are going to need the lower tiers. I mean, what if the lower tiers are setting a target that's less than that, less ambitious? And we've got this 15% target. What does it mean that we need to do? And how much, is it just by luck that we're going to hit that 15%? Do we simply hope that the lower tiers are going to be aligned with the the level of ambition that we have as an upper tier? And so that just leaves me, I know that we have our strategies, so we can do the things that we can do, but we only control that so much on the community level. We're really, I don't know, are we really relying on luck? I guess I'm looking for Caitlin to help me
I
with
just
that.
unmuted myself. I don't know, it's not necessarily that you're relying on luck, and maybe Hiba is best to speak about the the collaboration or between the upper and lower tiers. But certainly when we look at the strategies, we'll see what's what we can quantify and what's possible. So there isn't only an element of luck, but maybe I'll get Hiba to answer.
Yeah, so I think our goal with these targets is to work with our municipalities. So it was created in hopes that we will collaborate together to achieve this goal. So this will be a target for both the municipalities and the county, and then we work and develop our strategies. The county will have our mitigation plan, which is what our climate change action plan is primarily, and then the municipalities can have adaptation plans that more focus on specific areas that can help achieve this target. But ultimately, it's one target that we're all working towards achieving. And really, we're developing the strategies that you'll hear about at the next session that hopefully are built from understanding that this is the target we want to achieve, and how do we achieve that. And we made these strategies with the assumption that these are going to be the targets.
So I think part of that will be some necessary communication between us saying, these are the targets that we've set, and we want to make sure that you're going to be, as a lower tier, aligned with this, because we really need you to do your piece in order for us to hit our goals. In other words, if you don't make it, we don't make it. So I think there's going to have to be that communication, which feeds into your question C, are the policies in place planned for the future that align with the themes that we've got here? And so I think that will mean a lot of work that this group, I can see, will have to now communicate with the lower tiers and say, do we have it right? Can you be a part of this? And we're only going to make this together.
For sure. And one of our conversations with municipal planners and municipal staff was that, once we move into the implementation of this plan, we need to create a committee or a group that has both municipal representatives and the county, and working with our public works managers at each of our municipalities and providing them with resources. So really, we want to make sure that that we are accessing all of those resources. We are connecting and keeping that line of communication open and implementing it as one versus the municipalities doing their own and the county doing their own. I think that was never the objective of this plan. It's really the county is setting this target in collaboration with the municipalities and want to work with them to implement this plan and achieve that target.
Right, and we have to be prepared. I mean, if I'm looking just at the agricultural survey results, really what we're hearing from the agricultural community is we're on board, it would be great, but the biggest impediment is money. So we still have to be focused on the bottom line, because we would love to be a part of this, but you're going to need to help us figure out how we afford these initiatives. And I suspect many other groups will be in the same boat.
For sure. And I think one point to that is that there is a lot of great work already being done by our agricultural community and their organizations. So Alice, for example, is doing a lot of work. Stewardship Grey Bruce is doing a lot of work. So a part of it can be, as a county and municipality, supporting those organizations that are already carrying out this work and helping us achieve our targets. So it doesn't always have to be us recreating the wheel. We can be providing resources and supports to groups that are already doing it that can ultimately help us achieve our targets.
Thank you.
Councillor McQueen?
And just to follow up with the word, I think just something that comes to mind is from a municipal side is, and maybe this is going on a little bit what Kim was saying about buildings, is there a checklist that we can go through all our buildings? So I know, for example, Grey Highlands, and I know the county has as well, we have 3 works yards that you put your graders in, you put your trucks in. I bet you those buildings aren't very efficient as far as that heat trickling out through those walls. So, is there an opportunity for us to upgrade? Because I know they keep them warm, and, is there a way to upgrade those windows and doors? And it's like an audit. Is there something that we could develop, that we do a building audit of our own municipal buildings, community centers, and all that stuff? And I was a little disappointed a few years back the province did away with the carbon tax, because I looked at that as an opportunity of creating those funds for us to apply for to do those upgrades. I know the federal government still does that, and they said it was a revenue generator that could sort of help improve, and I think that was the intention there. But needless to say, I think that's one way of us demonstrating something that we can do as a municipality, upper and lower tier, of doing those building audits. And it's sort of, we can't expect others to do this, to meet these targets, if we don't start doing it ourselves. And so I think that's just one example, I think, of something. I know from a municipal side, from Grey Highlands, we were actually at last year's budget 2020, we were actually going to purchase an electric vehicle. That was something that we were doing, and but because of COVID, we held off because most of our staff are working from home anyway. And the whole idea was for staff that they needed to use a vehicle. There was a vehicle there, and we would have a charging station. But I think once we get out of this COVID thing, the opportunity of electric vehicles and charging stations, and because that's a part of infrastructure itself that needs to look at Grey County. And I think there were some incentives there. I think in Owen Sound, there's charging centers at the Canadian Tire, and I think some municipalities, not sure, Kim, did we talk about that in our budget? I'm trying to think if we were looking at maybe creating an opportunity for a charging. I know that one time there was grants out there, but I mean, people aren't driving around like they were, so these are things that will be post-COVID. But I mean, we still got to be thinking about that, right? And I can just imagine when we get post-COVID, people are just going to travel to beat the band and explore and you know, they're doing a bit now, but you can just imagine people are going to be so cooped up. They're going to be, so anyway, just something to do with an audit, and maybe it's all different. Maybe it's a vehicle audit, you know, maybe look at our fuel consumption and look at, is there ways to cut that fuel consumption by 10%? You know, you meet these little things and it just starts that ball rolling, and it's not a big hill, but it's something that we just need to start to do. And I think those are, you know, some things that I just wrote there as some suggestions. So.
I think, Paul, when you mentioned the electric vehicle charging stations, a year and a half ago, Georgian Bluffs was approached by a private sector company looking to put charging stations in, and we gave them approval to go ahead, but they were looking for funding. So I think there is some public-private ownership of that may bring that to fruition as well as we move forward. Nothing happened in ours, but that'll change with time as well. Hiba, do you have a comment to make?
Yeah, just on the charging stations comment, there is a group that's been created. It's a regional group that has Dufferin, Bruce, Huron, and Gray, and we're working, and they've been created to help understand how many charging stations exist within this region and how we can build out that network further. So they're looking to collaborate with all of these counties and to do a study of how many charging stations exist, and then how we can work with private sector organizations to build in more, or even with governments to build out more of that infrastructure, because we know that is going to be the future of cars. So we want to make sure that we are leading the charge in that. So that is a group that the county is part of and looking to support.
Excellent. Good news to have. Okay, if there are no more comments then on this section, we will move ahead. Is there any other business? Councillor McQueen?
Just a comment, and I don't know, I'm thinking back, was it maybe 2017 AMO conference in Ottawa, and they were demonstrating electric bus. I don't know if anybody, I don't know if it was 17 or thereabouts, and we had an opportunity to ride that electric bus. I don't know if any of those attended the aviation museum that was being offered there. But there was a number of speakers that were speaking at that conference at that time, and they were talking about testing electric snowplows and electric garbage trucks in Alberta. Now, Alberta's cold, and I don't know if anybody else has heard anything about that, but from a municipal side, we need trucks. We need trucks to plow snow. We need trucks to carry garbage. We need trucks, and trucks consume a lot of fuel, and so be it, because they're bigger. They're like farm tractors, they're just bigger. I don't know if that's something that we can follow up on or where that is. But China, I understand China has been really pushing a lot of electric buses there, and that was sort of, you know, the oversight of what they were talking about and these speakers that were speaking at that time. And I mean, that's going to be 4 years ago anyway, maybe it's longer. Mm-hmm. So, you know, so anyway, I just remember that as, you know, at one of our conferences, and that was at Ottawa. And so, I mean, when that technology changed, I know they're working on electric pickup trucks and stuff like that, which is a big consumer of a lot of construction and municipalities as well. So I think that maybe goes back to either Caitlin or Adar, is that Adar, is that your name? Yeah, sorry. Sorry about that. Where you talked about new technology and stuff like that. So there is things happening, and so it's just something that we need to keep be mindful. And you know what? Wouldn't it be, Grey County is always a leader in a lot of different things. Maybe we would be the leader to be the first electric snowplow. I don't know. You know, sometimes you got to walk the walk to, you know, talk the talk, you got to walk the walk, right? And I'm just thinking, you know, and maybe there would be some huge incentives to do that, to be out there, to be a leader. And, you know, the big part about Grey County is we have such a vastness, like Grey Bruce, and, you know, like we're big. So things have to move by vehicles. It's just, there's no way, it's just, you can't. I don't know, if I headed out to a county council meeting, walking there, I'd be there next week. But anyway, or even on a bicycle. So it's just like for me to drive downtown, it's an hour drive. That just tells you the vastness of Grey County. And so it's just, vehicles are something that is something that's not going to go away. And you know, I don't just see horse and buggy is going to be the solution of that. So it's just something to be mindful, again, as leaders, and is you know, is something to think about, you know, post-COVID and down the road. So anyway, sorry, I talked too much, Madam Chair, but it's just like, I sort of get excited about this stuff, you know.
Excellent. Thank you. Warden Hicks.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I believe that the session that Deputy Warden is referring to was a session put on by a company called BYD, Build Your Dreams. And they are an Asian-based company, but I understand that they have you know, outlets all over the world, and they are really looking at fleets. So they're really focusing, I think they're the world's largest producer of electric vehicles, but mainly sort of buses and plows and garbage trucks. And they really look at a municipality and say, what is it that you need? Well, we need X amount of buses, we need so many garbage trucks, and we need so many snow plows. So they provide you with sort of a custom. So they say, you're going to need this vehicle with this capacity, but you also need a power plant to go with it. And so my understanding is that they assist in the development of not just what you need in terms of the vehicles, but what you need in terms of where do those vehicles go to get, I guess, plugged in at night, and how do they replenish themselves? Pretty cool stuff. And that was, you're right, quite a few years ago that we saw that presentation. I don't know where BYD is at. I did look up their website at one point, but maybe it's something for us to look at.
I am seeing quite a lot of work on greening municipal fleets and case studies in that. I think it's about the size of the vehicles, right? In Europe, you see them all the time, but they're trying to navigate smaller distances and tighter streets than what we have.
Yeah, their presentation was very impressive. I mean, people talked about the Canadian climate, and they were definitely doing a lot of work in colder climates. Mm-hmm. And they talked about the payback. And I remember people even asking tough questions like, what happens when your battery cell, you know, goes down, because what does it cost to replace that? And they talked about our vehicles come with a 35-year warranties, and you get a new battery if it performs below 86% or something like that. So, and your payback was something like 5 years. It was pretty incredible. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I'm not an authority or anything, but I was very impressed with their presentation.
Mr. Hoy, I see you've come online here.
Yeah, we have in our budget this year to do a fleet review. We were going to hire a consultant to do a fleet review, more about whether our windows on how long we were keeping vehicles and stuff was appropriate. But I think maybe this is something we should maybe tie in with that study, just to see the next step of our fleet, right? Rather than keep going down the diesel path when maybe the electric path is 5 years away from being something we can really get into, right? So maybe we should include that in our RFP when we go out for the study.
Good idea. I guess my question would be, does an electric vehicle have the power to push that plow up a hill against a snowbank?
Well, that's always been the problem, right? Yeah.
Mr. McQueen?
Well, they have electric Mustang coming out this year, so that actually, what I understand with electric motors, the power and the speed is like the technology has really changed on that part. Just one last comment with regards to that presentation, and maybe the warden remembers that they had a chart, and it sort of showed your input, like to buy the unit, but your maintenance costs did this, and your traditional diesel truck, your maintenance costs did this. Because for like, there's I guess with electric motor and there's a lot less moving parts where with a diesel engine and the oil changes and the repairs and stuff, at the end of a 10-year cycle, and this is going back to what, I think, Pat, if you're going to go out there and do this, that you need to make sure you get the summary. But at the end of the 10 years, you know, say the bus costs you $1 million up front, but overall, you know, your maintenance cost of this, but that, you know, that $500,000 truck was here, but as you went after 10 years, there was almost a savings by buying the electric vehicle just on overall cost over that 10 or 12 year cycle. So that's something that is something that's, you know, it's just not, it's what it costs you to run that, not just in the sense of the initial capital cost. And so all those factors, I think, are something that it's all on that education and communication again, and all on that, how you're looking at that, right? So, and not only that is the emissions that you're not putting out there as well, right? It's, but you know, again, that also goes back to the source of the electricity. It doesn't make sense if it's a coal fire or a gas fired or some other fire to make the electricity, then it defeats the whole purpose. So that electricity has to be clean electricity to meet that what we're trying to achieve, right? So anyway, just another comment there, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Any other comments from committee members or staff? So is there any other business to attend to today? Seeing nothing, then our next meeting date is January 26th. I'm assuming at 1 o'clock in the afternoon again. I see nods. Okay. Excellent. Thank you, everyone. Do I need a motion to adjourn, or we just announce adjournment here?
We do need a mover and seconder to adjourn, Madam Chair.
Okay, I see Warden Hicks moving it and Councillor McQueen seconding. All in favor? Excellent. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you to our presenters today.